Oh my god, it's June.
Wait, what?
It's now June.
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 June!
June.
As it turned out, choosing Nikko as the location for their base was fraught with several problems. Operating in Nikko became an issue as the shogunate hadn't intended for the site to become desecrated by warfare, so they re-chose Aizu as their destination. In an act of irony, Nikko was overtaken by Imperial forces, and we lost another strategic location. Because we were at the mercy of the shogunate's fickle orders, we were constantly jumping from place to place, hoping to hear a bit of good news. After an eternity of waiting, we were given orders to depart from Nikko to Shirakawa. Nagakura and the rest of his men were planning an offensive strike against Shirakawa Castle as a regulatory gesture for their defeat in Utsunomiya. Retaliatory gesture for the defeat in Utsunomiya. Night had fallen by the time our men had reached the Aizu troops surrounding the perimeter of Shirakawa Castle.
昨日はあっち、今日はここかよ。白川城の状況はどうなんだ。膠着状態といえばまだいいが、実質は攻めあがねてるってところだ。敵は新型武器を持ち込んで城の守りを固めてやがる。この白川城を取り戻せねえと、この戦不利になっていくだけだ。そんな大事な城攻めだって。
Yeah.
増援は俺たちだけかよ。
Let me. God damn! I don't know. This monkey's pretty weird. I have to buy another headset.
本当に勝つ気があるんだ。
Yeah.
I go to search that.
A negative energy began seeping into the atmosphere of the camp, so I'd wanted to deflect from it quite quickly. My immediate inclination was to whip up something delicious to occupy their attention. This, if anything, was the only reprieve I could offer. Here, you two. I made all of you some supper. Please enjoy it while it's still warm.
すまねえ。ありがとうよ。
The ducks also get food. Don't worry.
Yes. Yes.
Harada eagerly dug into his meal with his chopsticks, unlike Nagakura, who seemed totally disengaged. There were lines of worry on his face, folding as he wavered back and forth on the cups of a great sigh. Nagakura, are you okay?
ああ、大丈夫大丈夫。なんでもねえって。
It was an obviously feigned answer, if I'd ever heard one. His sadness was unmistakable, as crushing as the weight was upon his shoulders when we made our return to Edo from Kyoto. A dull pressure ached in my chest. Just then, Nagakura's head poked up, and he gazed sternly at something from outside of our encampment. All of a sudden, he yanked his katana from out of his sheath, roaring into the blank darkness.
そこにいるやつ、止まれ。待ってくれ。ここは会津の陣か。だったらどうなんだ。俺は味方だ。江戸から逃げてきたところなんだ。頼む、助けてくれ。
Nagakura and I couldn't help but look at one another in confusion. Our strange visitor was a soldier dressed in shogunate attire, with a sunken face who had just narrowly escaped the occupation in Edo. Judging by his slovenly appearance, I figured that Edo, in its current state, took a massive toll on him. After we had left the Shinsengumi, news of Edo's occupation hit me like a cannonball, and I worried for the safety of our old friends. However, there was some solace to take in knowing that Edo hadn't fallen victim to savage warfare. After taking a moment to catch his breath, the soldier revealed to us a devastating bit of information.
なんだって？近藤さんが斬首になっただと？ どういうことなんだ。俺も詳しいことは知らないが、投稿した後に正体がバレて板橋で斬首になったと聞いている。そんなバカな。近藤さんが斬首なんて信じられねえ。
My jaw fell agape as I tried making sense out of all of it. From where we were previously told, Kondo-san had handed in his surrender as a Hatamoto. So, is all of this true?
俺も見たわけじゃないから。だが、瓦版が出回っていた。
Kondo-san had passed away. The thought struggled to find its feet in my mind. Such a thoughtful and boisterous leader cruelly taken from us too soon. On top of it all, he suffered humiliation by being beheaded in front of a public audience. His honor was stolen, and instead he was brandished as a criminal. Was the shogunate so unwilling to exert the efforts of saving his life? A lifetime of service and sacrifice discarded by the people for whom Kondo-san had sworn his life.
俺がそばにいたら、近藤さんは死なずに済んだかもしれねえよな。
Nagakura gnashed his teeth, struggling to reconcile his grief as he focused the blame upon himself.
土方さんがそばにいたはずだろう。あの人は何やってたんだよ。
We all stared nervously back at Nagakura as his temper flared, and only with Harada's cool guidance could we hope to ease Nagakura's pain.
落ち着けよ。話は聞いたはずだぜ。近藤さんは新選組を逃がすために投降したって。おそらく近藤さんが土方さんたちを行かせたんだろうよ。
けどよ、切腹もさせねえで斬首だぜ。そりゃねえだろうが。くそったね。
土方さん、もしかしたらこうなることが分かってたのかもな。だから死に物狂いで城攻めして死に場所を探してるのかもしれね
え。If what Harada was posturing were true, that Hijikata-san was somewhat aware of Kondo-san's fate, I couldn't begin to imagine the anguish befalling him, how bitterly he must have taken the news. Watching Nagakura lose his composure was a vivid enough picture for me to envision how the rest of our friends may have reacted. Words escaped me, as they so often did, and I looked towards Nagakura scowling at the crackling campfire.
で、他に何か情報はないのか？
ああ。江戸に残ってた将棋隊の奴らが上野に立てこもるって話だ。
上野で戦が始まったら江戸の町が戦場になるかもしれねえってのに。
Harada's brows furrowed in contemplation. One of the motivating factors in our departure from Edo was avoiding being in the epicenter of a large-scale conflict. Death was pursuing us at every turn, and we were helpless in fleeing from it. All of my rage was directed at the Imperial Army, who shamefully condemned Kondo-san to death, and at the shogunate for being complicit in the act. My fondness for Edo was wilting, like all things do, as its character and its citizens became alien to me. It was no longer a place to call home. After sharing with us what he knew, the soldier was whisked away to an Aizu domain representative. When it appeared as though our relative privacy had been restored, Nagakura and Harada produced 2 large bottles of sake, seemingly out of thin air. The 2 of them raised a silent toast, presumably in honor of Kondo-san. I held my tongue as I watched them throw back several shots. their cheeks becoming as rosy as a springtime afternoon. Soon, my own cheeks were wet from tears that flowed in a steady deluge into the late, late night. Dad's dead! The brisk dawn air bit my sensitive cheeks. Sadly, I woke in the morning without much sleep. Nagakura crawled from his tent with dark bags sagging under his eyelids, which led me to assume that his night had been similarly restless. Harada, however, greeted us with a startlingly deadpan expression.
シンパチ、ちょっと話があるんだ。
どうかしたか？
Harada's eyes darted left and right, and he bit into his lip as he quickly searched for the right words. Once he made up his mind, he snapped his fingers playfully, celebrating his tiny breakthrough.
将棋隊が戦を起こすって話を聞いたろ。本当なら江戸中が戦に巻き込まれるかもしれねえ。俺は幕府を守るより江戸の人を守りたい。頼む。俺を江戸に行かせてくれ。
Oh God.
江戸で世話になった人や近藤さんの家のこともいろいろと心配だしな。ちょっとだけ様子を見に行かせてくれ。みんなの無事を確かめたら戻ってくる。
Wait. Was Harada planning on returning to Edo alone? His request completely blindsided us, given that our march to Aizu was already set in motion. Immediately, I turned to look at Nagakura, whose lips quivered in the crevice of his mouth as he thought deeply about his dear friend's sudden request. If Harada were, in fact, to abandon their cause in order to pursue a separate mission, Nagakura would surely be thrown into another emotional crisis. As I gathered the courage to voice my passionate objection to his request, someone else spoke first. Nagakura stepped closer into the circle, his eyes boring heavily into Harada's.
頼みとか言ってるが、もう決めたことなんだろ？
ああ、悪いな。
任せとけって。佐野がいない間は俺が2人分働いてるから安心して行ってこいよ。
ありがとうよ、シンパチ。じゃあ、行ってくる。
They exchanged conversations casually, as if they were discussing any other subject. It was sudden enough to delude me into thinking Harada would soon return, if just for a cup of sake. The truth was a greater task to stomach. The fates of Nagakura and Harada were separating into unique journeys, creating a mystery of when, if ever, their paths would cross again. Harada lowered his head with a curt bow as he walked past Nagakura towards me. Moments ago, I resolved to make my reservations about his decision known, but now I was speechless. Harada.
すまねえな。あいつがこんな時に江戸に行くなんて言い出して。けどよ、俺も後悔したくなかったんだ。
A shiver ran across the length of my arms and into my shoulders, trickling along my spine. Harada mirrored a sentiment that Nagakura once shared with me only a few moons ago. Nagakura had grown fearful that one day he would tire of the Shinsengumi, disillusioned by its promise and forgetful of his tender memories. The bittersweet gleam in the center of Nagakura's eye was the same I saw in Harada's, and I knew there was nothing I could say to oppose him. Perhaps too little too late had I realized how close the kinship between Nagakura and Harada was. Okay. You can trust me to take care of Nagakura.
頼んだぜ。ああ見えてかなりへこんでいるはずだからな。
What the fuck? Something was flickering outside. I think it was a bird passing by the sun.
It was a duck.
Oh. Alright, it was the ducks. The ducks did it. Yep. Right. Harada, do be careful. Please return to us safely and swiftly. Harada chortled, lifting his hand to cover his mouth as he spun around without responding. What does chortled mean?
Who, what?
Chortled. Chortled.
What? Taller?
Chortled.
Chortle. I don't know.
That's weird. Chortled.
Oh,
Turtle.
Tortoise.
Turtle.
Yeah. I don't know what's that, to be honest.
No idea.
That thing.
Following soon after Harada's departure, the Aizu organized a series of calculated attacks against Shirakawa Castle to overwhelm Imperial forces. The Imperials, however, absorbed the Aizu's intense pressure with well-positioned guard towers, situating their men with a steady supply of munitions. Newly developed Imperial rifles ripped through waves of advancing Aizu soldiers from range with unbelievable precision. The Aizu struggled to cope with this vicious onslaught, clutching their outdated rifles like cursed totems while being blasted by cannon fire. Nagakura was among them. A thick, filthy layer of blood and sweat coated his skin as he cried out to his nearby comrades. With his arm raised to beacon his men back, he charged surprisingly into the hopeless fray. He covered his men from the rear as they flailed recklessly away from danger.
もうダメです。これ以上は無理ですよ。敵は俺が引きつけるから、お前らはさっさと撤退しろ。
A stray bullet pierced through Nagakura's arm just as he had spoken, producing a thick gush of blood.
こんくらいの傷じゃ、俺は倒せないんだよ。死ぬ気でかかってこい。
His courageousness could be explained by that promise he had made to Harada. It astounded me to watch him weave through lines of allies and enemies alike to defend the rear guard, thrusting himself into the veritable belly of the beast. The barrel of every Imperial rifle was pointed directly at Nagakura, thanks to his bravery. To the untrained eye, Nagakura was a fool, making himself vulnerable to hundreds of riflemen. However, he was a fury, and in the back of my mind, I knew that he was safer than he appeared. However, it was still no excuse to put himself at risk so needlessly. Nonetheless, Nagakura inspired me, and his sword was stained with scarlet as he struck every Imperial soldier who happened to cross his path.
長倉さんはさすが元新選組だよな。けどよ、さすがに真似はできないぜ。命がいくつあっても足りやしない。だがまあ、長倉さんが先頭にいれば安心だ。
As concerned as I was, watching Nagakura lead by example, the reinvigorated cries of his allies were heard from all around us. Nagakura, is this what you truly wanted? We entered a hushed room in the battle's aftermath. It was then that I had decided to speak with Nagakura about his cavalier behavior. I took a deep breath and marched up to him. This boy is being a fool! Nagakura, I've got something to tell you. Or, actually, it's more like something to ask of you. Please don't fight so recklessly out on the battlefield. You're always the first one in, and then you're the last one to leave. Watching you fight stresses me out. It's almost like you've got a death wish. Nagakura flexed his hand into a fist, answering me in a reserved tone.
けどよ、部下を助けるためには仕方なかったんだよ。それに、俺は羅刹だ。多少のことじゃ死にはしないさ。
I knew it. Nagakura was beginning to embrace his condition as a fury. It was a slippery slope that needed to be avoided. Just because you're a fury doesn't give you the right to go in with the intention of getting hurt. That's no way to do things. My response struck... The ducks agree. My response struck a nerve with Nagakura, who began raising his voice in return.
じゃあどうすればいいって言うんだよ。せめて仲間や部下が死なないように俺が盾となって戦っていれば、それだけみんなが助かるじゃねえか。
In a way, I admired his selfish desire to preserve the lives of those serving under him. It reminded me of Kondo-san, whose legacy, at the end of his life, was becoming enshrined in the myth of his own sacrifice. Just as Harada had previously told me, Nagakura and Kondo-san weren't too different, hence their past tendency of butting heads time and again. It all became clear to me. At times, both Nagakura and Kondo-san were both inept at articulating the reasons behind their actions. I wondered to myself if Nagakura idolized the way in which Kondo-san gave his life. Perhaps I may have been overthinking it, but I had to decide to tell him. The guide says, Nagakura, I'm worried about you. I decided it was best to voice my concerns. Consequences be damned. It's because I am worried about you, Nagakura. All of this is an act because I know you're grieving over Kondo-san and that you missed Harada. But is this any way to honor them? By acting like a complete imbecile out on the battlefield?
そうか。悪かったな。そんなに心配をかけていると思わなくてさ。
You just don't get it. It doesn't just bother me. I'm worried sick about you. So would you mind taking better care of yourself? Please? Nagakura stared at the floor, forming his lips into a weird smile.
それ、土方さんにも言われたよな。
I gasped. I only remembered after Nagakura pointed it out. He was referring to an incident that had occurred shortly after we had arrived in Edo. Nagakura was embroiled with a dispute with a group of samurai at a bar, prompting Hijikata-san to lecture him scathingly about how he needed to be more careful.
俺は考えるよりも先にすぐ体が動いちまうからダメなんだよな。
Then Nagakura finally lifted himself out of his slump, turning to bow deeply at me.
本当にすまなかった。そしてありがとう。こんな俺なんかのことを本気で心配してくれて。
No! There's no... phone. No! There's no need to apologize. Seriously, I just appreciate you listening to me.
ああ、本当に反省してる。もう心配かけないようにするよ。だから安心してくれ。
He smiled at me shyly, which was enough to make my heart flutter just a tad. It felt good knowing my feelings were acknowledged, which was a welcome bit of solace in this trying time. Nagakura put his fingers to his chin, stroking absent-mindedly as he pursed his lips.
でも、今の正教隊じゃ新政府軍と戦うことは難しいんだ。いざという時だけ使っても構わないか。絶対に無茶はしない。仲間を救うためとか、本当にいざという時だけだから。
What he said was sensible, and I suppose there was no stopping it if such a situation arose. Can I trust you to keep your promise?
ああ、約束する。
Then fine. Only then can you use them. His reaction was not what I was expecting. Uh-oh. I think it's time for round 3. Suddenly, his shoulders froze. His face curled into a pained grimace.
悪いな。ちょっとだけ一人にさせてくれ。
Without waiting for me to answer, Nagakura bolted out of the room.